Hello and welcome to Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. I'm shocked by that energetic intro there. You sound like because you sound like a 90s talk show host on radio. But no, that was very impressive. But no, I'm doing good. I'm doing all right.
I was trying to be just a little bit musical with it because where I went up to and where I went down to, it was pretty close to an octave, I think. Or maybe.
It was super impressive. That
yes.
was the best intro I've ever heard. Yeah. No, I'm good. How are you doing?
I am alive and kicking. It's starting to get a little chilly out.
Yeah, here too. Yeah. But a different kind of chilly.
You got like a nippy 72 or something? We got snow on the ground. Piss off.
Yeah, no snow on the ground. We're kind of, or as I say, we as a collective, like I can speak for everybody, but I'm happy that weather's actually cooled off a little bit here in LA, and it's and you know, if you're listening to anywhere else in the world, you're probably going fuck off. But
well, I am.
yeah. No, it's so it's nice. You can only get so many days in the high 90s or triple digits, and it gets a little bit weary after. Yeah,
a little old real fast.
But that's why I'm rocking my Studio Tan here. If you're watching the YouTube feed, there you see I'm a nice eggshell white.
Yes, but that's kind of your Swedish self, isn't it?
Yeah, I did not win the genetic lottery when it comes to being able to tan. I'm half English and half Swedish, so
unfortunate for you.
I get pink and then I flake off, and it's not good. I will never be known as like, oh, did you see Chris? He was nicely bronzed. No, it's not going to happen.
Well,
so
anybody out there like to do some bronzing for Chris?
Yeah,
we'll give you a medal for it.
There you go. Yeah. No, I'm good. You're not going to get any skiing soon, are you?
Well, I don't really want to delve too far into this, but they plan on opening on I think November 20th. That's the plan, provided they actually get snow and it's cold and the whole deal. So we'll see. It's very close to ski season at this point for this particular podcast.
Very cool. Well, I guess that's the weather and skiing segment of the podcast done, right?
You know, but here I've got a quick way to segue into this. So with skiing early on in the season, especially where I'm at, they make man-made snow.
Yes. In
order to be able to open and call themselves a ski resort at a certain time of year. And that man-made snow is not really the same as the stuff that falls out of the sky and layers up upon itself, and it can be very soft and forgiving, whereas the man-made stuff is usually a little bit icy, and it's usually they grind it up into little balls, and it's not quite, it's like skiing on beanbags or beans from beanbags. And some people might actually equate that to what an emulation might be in an EQ. Instead of actually having the actual hardware unit that is the stuff that falls from the sky, like magic, you have this emulation of an EQ. And that's like your man-made version that's like not quite as good, so to speak. And that's our segue. And I stick the landing right there. So today's episode, we are talking about hardware and digital EQs, and not so much hardware EQs, but digital recreations, the emulations of these fantastic hardware pieces of gear versus straight up just digital EQs that are not meant to be emulating anything else.
Very cool. Yes, that is indeed what we're talking about.
Was that kind of smooth? I don't know if I made that really well.
It was way smoother than I would have been able to segue from skiing into that. So nicely done. That
was my improvisational skills right there.
You know, you could have gone with like slopes and that kind of tie in as well, but
missed
there
it.
You go. Yeah. Well, we'll start over now.
All right. No, well, let's kick it off.
Yeah. So let's start with the emulations, I guess.
Let's get on that chairlift and go.
Sure. What do you have any favorite emulations that you like to use all the time?
as in a particular piece of hardware gear, or as in a particular manufacturer that makes emulations?
Well, I know the answer to the second one. That would obviously be Universal Audio, but no, but any particular sort of emulation that you like to go to? Do you usually reach for like, and I know, yeah, it's program dependent, but do you like to go for a PulTec style, like an SSL style, or somewhere in between? But do you have anything that you like to grab? Like your first go-to kind of EQ when it comes to that?
So the EQ emulation that I'm first to like pull up and say, yes, this is it. More often than not, it will be a PulTec. More often than not. No questions asked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what do you do by that? Why a PulTec?
I think it has more to do with its simplicity.
Yeah.
In its interface, because generally speaking, it has 3 groupings, unless you have the mid EQ version of it as well, that adds 3 more and makes it 6. But the original PulTec had 3 things. It had the highs, it had the lows, and it had a broad range for mids. And then when they added the MEQ, that added
more mid-range.
More mid-range controllability for 3 separate functions on the mid-range as well. Right. So more often than not, I'm falling into the PulTec as a general EQ that I'm using.
Okay.
Yeah. So that would be my answer right there.
Right. The PulTec. Okay.
Yep.
I can live with that. I like the PulTec. I don't use them strictly PulTecs as much. One that I reach for a lot is it's a hybrid emulation of a lot of different things, and it's the Slate Custom Series EQ.
Okay, and what is it emulating multiple things of?
Different curves, different frequency bands. It emulates different aspects of certain EQs. Now there are, I know, and the highs and the lows I tend to be similar to a PulTec kind of curve, but it also is dependent on the mids and stuff are not PulTecs. It hasn't been completely open with what they're emulating in there. More the
so you have no idea.
I have educated guesses, but I don't have. I can't say for certain. Only Mr. Slate and Fabrice Gabriel could tell you that, or probably anybody else that works for Slate. But do
you think they do that for licensing reasons?
Possibly.
Since they, if they don't tell you what it is and they're not telling you any specific thing that they're actually emulating, there's no license to be paid for that.
That's very possible. It's very possible, or maybe it's just you end up with a list of like 10 EQs that it's emulating at certain stages. So it's like, well, this is the PulTec SSL Neve EQ. It's like, well, okay, but I don't know. I can't answer that.
Okay,
I'm not privy to that information. So,
well, do you want like my other maybe round out like a top 5 on the other
sure,
EQs
give me the
that
top
I use?
5. Yeah. There we go.
So 3 of my top 5. So we already have the top 1 that I tend to pull up the most is the PulTec. The second, third, and fourth are Neve EQs. The 1073, the 1081, and the 88 RS.
Okay.
Those are the next 3 that are like make up my top 4. And then my 5th one ends up being the SSL. And I guess you could lump the E and the
E and the G,
and the G series into that lump of that number 5. So that rounds out my top 5 of. Oh no. Actually, I'll pull this out. So take that back, scratch that. Number 5 is actually the Helios EQ. And number 6 is the SSL E and G EQs. I'll just lump them together as 6. And it's not like there's any particular order. It's just those are the 6 that I use the absolute most.
Yeah.
And that has a lot to do with like, what instrument am I using it on? What part of the recording or mixing chain am I in, kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So that leads to a question that we should bring up later, but I think it's a good time to do it. Because you're bringing up these types of emulations that you like to pull from your first call kind of EQ type of a thing.
Yes.
Why are you choosing those? Is it for the particular aspects that they are imparting on your sound, or is it that you're just comfortable using these and that's why you're using those?
I think it's a combination of both.
Yeah.
Combination of both. Certain EQs impart certain vibe.
Certain characteristics.
Characteristics. So in that regard, as we tend to say of like, here, cheers, let's do a shot of whatever it is we're drinking, program dependent is heavily a factor. The next factor becomes instrument dependent. So a lot of the time when I'm using, say, the Helios, 98% of the time probably that's on guitars, because it just has this really cool way it deals with guitars.
Yeah. Do you find I don't have the Helios? I'm not a universal guy, but
it's a three section EQ as well. It has a low section, one mid section, and a high section. Yeah. And it's pretty simplistic. The low section, you're either cutting at 50 dB at 50 hertz, X amount of dB from 3 up to about, I think, 15 dB on a slotted.
So it's in a step?
Yeah, it's in steps, and it's based on their dB steps at 50 hertz. And then if you actually want to boost at 50 dB, it actually gives you a different choice of where you're boosting and the knob.
You mean boosting at 50 hertz?
Well, actually, I think it changes the frequency range of where you're boosting, and then there's a second knob that actually controls how much you're boosting in dB value. So it can either operate as a single knob that's reducing at 50, or you can change the frequency as you go up, and then it has a second knob for the volume level.
For this, okay.
So it's a little bit funky in that regard. And then the mid section is either a peak or a trough. It's one or the other. You get one choice. And then you can choose the frequency that it's either boosting or reducing, and then the amount of dB that it's doing it. And then the high end is set at 10K and has steps of like 2 dB at a time. And that's it. That's all you got.
Yep.
And it just has a really cool vibe for guitars.
Nice.
Yeah.
Is that from that's not the Kramer stuff? No, because the Kramer stuff is, I mean, I know I think he liked the Helios, but these are separate. These are not, because I think that I'm thinking about the Waves versions of those, right? Where they have the
this is a Universal
version,
Audio. It's Universal Audio.
So his name is not associated with this at all.
No,
right?
and it's based off the Helios console.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, I think that's okay. Yeah.
So there it is. That's the simple of that.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's other, occasionally I'll pull out a Waves vintage EQ. Once in a while, pull out the Logic vintage EQ.
Right.
Because they have a few choices of various EQs in there as well. They have a PulTec rendition. They have a couple of others. And then even more on the rarity side of like, because going to the Waves, the Logic, and this other one I'm about to mention is when I just want to try something different. Because sometimes you just want to throw caution to the wind, so to speak, and you just throw in something different. And iZotope also makes a vintage EQ as well. So that's my other, not necessarily go-to, but it is something that I do throw on once in a while.
Yeah, they're just like we've talked about compressors and things when we've been doing, the deep dives into the LA2A or the 1176 and like past episodes. There's so many manufacturers are making a lot of versions of these, like SSL EQs and the Neve EQs and all this kind of thing. And it's I think just like with the compressors and everything, it's very easy to get overwhelmed when you're starting with this and just assuming that because you're using, this is a Neve EQ, that it's somehow just instinctively better.
Well,
right? But
there's certain elements to that are kind of correct. And I actually had a discussion with another producer friend of mine who emailed me about the universal audio system because he was downsizing and he wanted to know more about it. And he was telling me of a conversation that he got into with someone else on the internet, as you can tend to do once in a while. And
wait, arguing with strangers on the internet?
Yeah,
no. Is that a thing?
Yeah. And so he was asking about the concept of using these emulations and whether or not it makes such a huge difference. And I said, there is a point of reference to it does have its thing that it does. And
absolutely. Yeah.
The other thing that happens is that his response was, if you can't make something sound good with just one of these good things, you have a problem. And I think he's right in that regard, because it doesn't matter if I use the Helios or if I use the Neve or if I use the SSL. And I would say the same probably of your technical skills. It wouldn't matter if you're using the Helios, the Neve, or the SSL, or any other emulation, in that you have enough wherewithal with how well you work that you can get a really good sound out of whatever it is that you're using. And that just comes from experience, pure and simple. But you know, when you're getting into the concept of like the different vibes that these things can impart, yes, there is that. They do have their own distinct values, but that doesn't mean that something's going to necessarily be technically better because it went through an SSL as opposed to a Neve, or better because it went through the Helios instead of the PulTec. So
yeah, no, that I think that's very, very well put. And that's kind of like the point I was trying to get at there, where just because you use an emulation EQ doesn't necessarily make your skill level jump 10 measurement units, right?
You don't suddenly level up to 100 from 10.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important to remember, especially when we're not comfortable with these concepts. Like a couple of episodes ago, we talked about the basics of EQ, right? And if you're not comfortable using an EQ, just a regular stock EQ that comes in your DAW, you may not appreciate the differences of the emulations that are available. So it's easy to fool ourselves. And I think the same thing goes with when we're talking about compression and things like that as well. If we're not comfortable with the basics of how a compressor, or in this case, an EQ functions and how you use it, the nuances that something else is going to impart is, I don't want to say lost on you, but I'm going to say that anyway, lost on you.
It's always lost on me. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I just turn knobs and hope for the best, right? Yeah.
That's the best way to go about it, isn't it?
But I think that's an important distinction, because it is very, very easy to get seduced by something. Now,
but of course,
but all that being said, they do, like you mentioned, they do impart something. They do behave differently, and if you can get the result that you want faster using an emulation of a Neve or an SSL or a PulTec or a Helios or whatever it happens to be, then by all means use that. But it doesn't mean that that's the tool that always sets you over the top or puts your mixes to a different level.
Well, it does for me, damn it.
For you, obviously, but we all strive to be like that. But it's I don't know. I think, again, when you can read, and this is, you know, the worst part ever in a lot of cases is like internet forums when you're talking about gear.
Yeah.
Right. There can be a lot of misinformation, and people like to feel like they know everything. So, unless you're using this emulation, your mixes are shit.
Well,
you know?
What are we doing? What the fuck are we doing? Why are we doing this podcast? We're spreading misinformation, right? No,
I'd like to think not. I'm sure some people would argue with that, but that's the least our goal. Yeah. You know, to wade through some of that. So
wade. Get your waders on.
Yep.
The bullshit's going to get thick.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I'm a big fan of these as well, and of the emulations, I should say. I'm not a universal guy, but I use the custom EQ in the Slate. I use the SSL a lot. I use
So because I'm not as versed with the Slate as you are, being that you
yeah,
use it day in and day out.
yes,
You say that they have this custom EQ that apparently emulates several different vintage hardware EQs. Yeah. You're also saying they have specific ones that are specific emulations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Rattle those off for us. Or can you?
Which ones am I going to miss? Yeah, I'm going to try to go. Well,
sorry,
there's
Steve.
The Neve. Yeah, no, there's the Neve.
Mm-hmm.
There is an SSL. There is the custom series, like I mentioned there, that has two flavors. There's one that's like a 4-band, and there's one that just has, super simple, where it's just the low end and the high end, and that's that. It's called the Lift.
But is it a vintage something?
Is
it an emulation of something?
It's an emulation of several things that, again, just like the custom series EQ, it's not specific to this. But you have two different flavors on how the high shelf and the low shelf are reacting.
Okay.
And it's basically how aggressive or how gentle the slope is at the frequency of the shelf. There's an API, and the API has the additional functionality of, which is kind of like the Helios, like you mentioned before, where it's a stepped EQ, right? So you have these and these frequencies, and I don't have them memorized and I don't have it in front of me, but it's a step, right? So you go up to, let's say you got 400 and then you got 600 and then it's 8 or whatever in the mids, right? And then you got your dB knob. That's how the API works, right? There's those steps. With this emulation, you just hold down a modifier key and you can actually sweep that as well.
Oh,
so
nice.
That's something. So there is the emulation, but there's that added functionality to it. So there's the API there as well. So what did I say? The SSL, the Neve, the API, and these custom EQs there as well. So
sure.
I use, and depending on the project or content dependent, it would depend on what I'm trying to use or what I would reach for. But
sure.
I should say that the custom series EQ is something that I add. It's not a problem-solving EQ. It's a sweetening EQ. It's to make something sound better.
Gotcha.
Right? So that's the way I use it anyway.
Sure.
But if I have to do some cutting or solving problems, getting rid of annoying frequencies or whatever it happens to be, my first go-to is either actually the Logic EQ, which I think is really, really good, which we'll talk more about in a second here with the stock plugins. But if I'm using the Slate rack, I will go with an SSL, where I can control the Q width of the signal, so
sure.
that I don't have to do a boost or a wide cut if there's something I need to cut out. So,
right.
So those are the ones that I like. But like you mentioned, I like having all these tools. I like actually like the Waves Neve plugins, which are not called Neve; they're just called the Vintage series for
right.
licensing issues, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Where it's the 1073 and the 1081, I think, that are in there as well. And sometimes they do the job. I find that the Neve EQs are very, by design, of course, they're very aggressive.
Yeah.
So you can just boost a little bit or cut a little bit, and it's not like, ooh, did I really hear a difference? Yeah, you'll hear it. So in a very rare case would you boost, or at least me, if you're boosting like 5 dB or more, it might be the wrong source audio.
Well,
but I'm painting with very broad strokes.
Yeah,
here.
they're very broad strokes. Because I can think of a mix that I was working on last week, where it was recorded back in the late 90s. And
before audio was even invented.
Yeah, before audio was even invented, they had already recorded it in this digital format that had issues, and they didn't record it extremely well. And I had to do a very radical EQ on the bass track in order to get the bass to sit better and sound not necessarily correct, but just sit better in the track and not be muddy and just meh.
Yeah.
So, and it required a very radical EQ. So,
sometimes you have to do it. And I think we mentioned this briefly in the general EQ podcast, but if you come up against one of those cases, don't be afraid of EQ. Like if you have to boost or cut by, 15 dB, then do it. Nobody's going to listen to it in isolation. So whatever.
Tell you were so wrong to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So, anyway, speaking of digital recording and digital stuff, we should just about transition right here after a word from our sponsor. And we're back. We're going to shift gears away from the hardware emulations and start talking about digital EQs.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's do it.
So when I'm thinking digital EQ, I'm thinking, now, of course, these are all digital EQs, but they're not.
But it was very specific. It's not emulating something specific, is what you're trying to get at.
So I tend to think of these more as sort of crispy, clean EQs. They're not going to impart anything more than what you're telling them to do.
Sure.
There's no necessarily magic, we're going to add more harmonics here if I boost 5K or whatever happens to be. It's just going to boost 5K. And like we said at the top of the episode, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And sometimes, for me, I think when you're problem solving, if there's an issue with the audio, ringing, rumble in the low end, whatever happens to be, that might be the way to go. And like you implied, if you were to do a mix and your hands were tied behind your back and you had to use just the Logic stock plugins, you'd make a fine mix. It's not like it would be night and day.
Don't break my arm trying to pat it on the back.
Well, yeah, I'll reach through the screen here. I'll pat you on your back, Jody. But the idea there is that you know your EQs well enough that
I would hope so.
Well, that's the goal, I would think, right? If you use them, you'll be fine. I mean, they're
Do you know the analogy that I would make?
What's that?
Is that we work on, I guess, what would be considered a professional level DAW.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the DAWs that I tend to use are considered the quote unquote pro level DAW, whether it's Logic or Pro Tools or
insert favorite DAW here.
Luna. Whatever your favorite DAW is. Now, there are other DAWs that are not quite that strong or as feature rich. And one of them is the kind of like the baby brother to Logic would be GarageBand.
Right.
However, that being said, based on having enough experience with working with enough gear, I would think that you or someone else of at least our level or higher could work in GarageBand and still turn out a very, very nice sounding recording that would sound very professional. It's not like baby brother DAWs can't do it. It's a matter of experience. So GarageBand, as the example, has stock plugins that do EQ, and those EQs are very capable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
I think that's what you're trying to get at. Is that the stock EQs that come with your DAW are not technically bad EQs. They do what they do, and if you know what you're using and how to use it, and you can hear that stuff, you will do a decent job with it. It's not like they break the bank on you.
Right. No, I would recommend anybody when they say, "Oh, well, they get their first DAW and they get, oh, I've just bought Logic. What plugins should I get?"
None.
Right. And my first question is always that. Well,
How well do you know to
what,
go?
well, what do you feel like the Logic plugins aren't doing for you? What are you missing?
Yes.
And I think we have it on our list of episodes to do here. Eventually, to do an episode about the want and need of
of things. Yes.
Gear acquisition. But it's very, very easy to fall into that trap. And it's, I'm as guilty of it as the next guy. But when you see like a sexy piece of software, it looks like, ooh, look at that. It looks exactly like the first time I saw the SSL console in Reason. When they did that, it was like, oh my God, that looks so cool.
I gotta have it.
Yeah. Or the first time. Yeah, go ahead.
That might be what we should maybe term as GDS.
Okay.
I've stumped him.
No, because
Gear derangement syndrome.
Because I know it as GAS, gear acquisition syndrome.
Well, that's a different syndrome.
Okay.
Gear derangement syndrome. Gear derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
Would be what I would call that, because you can get away with doing real nice recordings with the stock plugins.
Yeah.
So it's not that you technically need any of these other things from third-party companies most of the time with your DAWs, but they're fun to have. But to be delusional about certain things between what certain EQs can do, well, that's GDS, not GAS.
Good. I'm going to start using that. Yeah. No, it's very true, because we a lot of times, as much as we like to deny it, we listen with our eyes a lot.
It's like you just said, it's a sexy EQ. You wanted it because it looked sexy.
Yeah. Oh, it sounds so much better. Now, to play devil's advocate with that, though.
Here it comes.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think it's a fair thing to say that if you have a nice looking plugin that looks like maybe like a hardware unit, it inspires you to work more, and it helps you work faster.
Okay.
Now, so let's say, for example, in Logic, right? Most, if not all, you can turn the GUI off and just have it be numbers and sliders.
Yep. You can do that. You can do that with the UA stuff too.
Right. How many people do you know that do that? None, right?
None.
And what do you suppose that is? Because it's like we like to be inspired by what we look at. It's the same as like I could be really turned off by the appearance of the GUI of a DAW, because I don't necessarily want to stare at that all day. If it has a certain look. Like it took me a minute to get used to when Logic went 10 from 9.
Sure.
It was like, no, what did you do? You turned it into GarageBand,
Curses, Apple, curses.
Yeah. So it's those things do influence us. But if we are disciplined enough to, just kind of like close our eyes and actually listen to the mix that we're doing or what we're actually doing. And how many times have we done that before? Like you said, and you're trying to EQ a compressor or EQ, you're trying to EQ a snare or something like that. And you say, it doesn't really say, that sounds a little bit better. And then you realize it's actually bypassed, that kind of thing. So
hold my hand and don't look at the screen and tell me when I've done something.
Right. Yeah.
Never get the hand squeeze. Yep. So I can agree with that statement. Certainly. Yep.
That was a little left turn. But bottom line is that the sort of air quote here, digital EQs are absolutely fine.
Yes.
So, because one EQ that I don't have it, I haven't worked with. I think I might have done a trial at some point, but it's like the Fab Filter EQ. It's like
lovely EQ.
Yeah.
And a fun interface too.
Yeah. Yeah. So people swear by that because you got so much control over it, right? You have all the precision, and there's a different one that comes with the Slate bundle now. It's called the Infinity EQ, which is a similar sort of style, very, let's say, modern EQ where you got control over every parameter and this, that, and the other thing. And, it's fantastic tool. So it depends on why you would use one over the other. I think it's just what helps you work faster. And do you really want to impart those qualities like an analog emulation will impart on your sound?
Yeah, I can agree with that. So to kind of push forward with this digital thing, since you just announced Fab Filter.
Yeah.
Another one that I use a lot in the digital side of things where I'm not trying to impart vibe. I'm just trying to do EQ. The iZotope EQs that come in the Ozone package.
Ozone. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those EQs are very, very nice. And I tend to use them quite a bit, especially when I'm working in Luna. They just do a fantastic job. So I can't complain about them. Love them. Use them a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, I like to say again and again, but it's like, it's an embarrassment of riches today that with all the plugins that are out there and all the tools that we have, that, there's so much good stuff out there.
Right.
So, if somebody, what EQ should I get? Well, any. Whatever you have,
Let's kind of go because you asked me earlier kind of what my number one choice was on the emulation side, and then we kind of expanded it out to top 5, and then it kind of became top 6. What is your what is your number one digital EQ, and then what is your top 5?
Emulation?
No, digital EQ.
Top 5.
Digital
top 5
EQ.
Digital EQ.
Yeah.
The first one I go to is the Logic EQ. Yeah.
Okay.
That because I think a big part is too because I'm really comfortable with the workflow of using it. And it's not like it changes drastically, but it's right there in my DAW. It's it has a great visualizer, and the bands in there, you have a lot of control over everything. So that's my first one.
Okay.
I also like the but I use this one a little bit more, not as often actually, but it's the Eosis EQ.
Yes, Fabrice.
Fabrice Gabriel. That's another fantastic one. And again, it's like every control that you want and then 10 more, right? So it's a really, really, really nice EQ as well. I haven't actually used the Infinity EQ that I own as much. And it's simply because I hate to say it, but I have too much stuff, man. But it's when you're working on, you mentioned before, but when you're working on a project, sometimes you have the luxury of, okay, I'm going to experiment. I'm going just for no other reason than to change stuff up. You end up reaching for another EQ or something, just to kind of do something different. But I guess I'm kind of stuck in my way. So how many digital EQs did you want? You want 5 top 10 or
5 top 10? That'd be huge. No, you already named off about 5. 3. So
3,
2 more rounded out, I would think.
What digital EQs? What do I don't think I necessarily use any more than those.
Stumped the chump.
No, I mean, I could rattle off names, but the reality is that I don't really use them. I suppose, no, it tends to be with the Logic and the Eosis EQ.
Okay.
Those are pretty much it. When I go to that, and more often than not, if I'm reaching for something like that, it's the Logic EQ. It's really light on processing power. I can get it done quickly, whatever I want. If you're asking me about on the emulation side,
no, because we already did that.
Well, okay, then I will mention it. So there. So you have to guess.
You'll have to just hit rewind if you want Chris's top 5 there.
I didn't give you my 5. I gave you yours. Or
no,
you gave yours. Yeah.
I did, but you rattled off a bunch that you used through Slate, so that's where I was counting that out.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, I like the sound of my own voice. What can I tell you?
Yeah.
No, but Uh,
La 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 la
yeah.
la la la. Anyway, so
Is that the nonsense segment?
it
of
is.
the
That's the
podcast?
nonsense of the episode right there.
Yeah.
I'm going to mention a couple of different things here, and one of them is borderline digital, not digital, kind of 2 feet in, like, is also hardware, but there's an emulation of it, and it's something I use quite a bit on vocals, and that
Okay.
is the Maag EQ4.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That thing has the most beautiful airband ever. It's to me, it's a digital EQ, but it's not digital. It's actually based off of a hardware EQ, and they are made in Provo, Utah. They just, the hardware unit is really awesome. The software unit is just the same awesome. It's just really, really cool. And a lot of the people that I know that have it strictly use it for the airband,
Yeah.
which is selectable from 2.5, 5, 10, 20, and 40 kilohertz.
Yeah.
And then you can boost it. And when you're boosting like 20K and you boost like 5 dB, it seems like that would be insane. But the smoothness that EQ gives out is just incredible. And it's not so much a vibe thing as it is, it just really tackles the high end of a mix extremely well. And it really gives the vocal the ability to pop out without sounding harsh.
Yeah.
And that's probably, in terms of digital EQs, not necessarily my number one, but definitely a go-to.
Yeah.
For
No, I
me.
know you. Yeah, you speak highly of that.
Well, I'm
Maag
not the
EQ.
only one. There's a lot of people that
No,
do.
no, I know, but we work closely together.
Yes.
So, yeah.
You know my opinion on that one.
I do.
And now
yeah.
everybody
No,
else does too.
Right. And if they don't, they should. But there is a similar thing with the Eosis thing, and that's the airband there as well.
Right.
And it is, yeah, sometimes you can almost equate it as to you're pulling a blanket off of a sound. It's like, oh, there it is. You know, so that high end just get that nice kind of sparkle. It's very, very
Yes,
easy
sparkle.
to overdo that though, I think, because it sounds so good. So you're like, oh, it's more is better. And then you come back the next day and it's like, what the hell, you know?
What the fuck was I thinking? Or what the hell was I hearing?
Yeah. So there's a lot of interesting things going on with us that you can, when you're, I think something to bring up is like when you're emulating hardware, it tends to be, you're trying to recreate this sort of vintage vibe or something classic kind of thing that is there. But when you sort of leave that legacy alone and you're thinking, no, we're going to do something different just because we have the tools now. We're going to do something in a digital way that is going to enhance something else that was simply just not possible with the old gear. It can open some doors to possibilities that obviously was not there before.
Sure.
So why should you use one or the other?
Well, there's more to go on here before we start jumping one over the other kind of thing.
Okay, cool.
I'm going to rattle off kind
Go
of
for
a multiple use thing here of what I use digital side. So I've already mentioned the Maag, and that one kind of skirts the line between digital and hardware and emulation and all that kind of stuff because it's such a clean EQ that it has more of a digital feel in that it doesn't impart vibe as the same in a way that an emulation normally would. That's why I kind of put the Maag in the digital realm, even though it is based off of a hardware box.
Sure.
So I like you, when I'm working in Logic, I'm using Logic EQ. And then if it's something that's like very, very much phase dependent, it's the linear EQ in Logic, which is also a digital EQ. Ranked right alongside that is the same one that I mentioned that I use when I'm using Luna, and that's the iZotope Ozone 9 EQ. On occasion, I'll pull out a fab filter because, like I mentioned earlier, when you were talking about it, it has a fun interface, and it's also a very, very nice EQ. I've never worked with the Infinity EQ, so I can't put that on my list. However, there is another EQ, and it is more of an automatic EQ, and it is a digital EQ, and it's kind of funky. and that is the Gulfoss EQ.
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't worked with that either, but that looks interesting.
Well, I've got it and I've used it on occasion, and it's quite something as to what it does. You kind of give it this range of like what you want the EQ to kind of sound like based on these, it would feel like esoteric values. And then you stick it on the track, you give it these little esoteric values, and all of a sudden, boom, it just makes that thing sound really good in real time.
So is that's, if I understand that correctly, and I may not, but that has some like AI type of functionality in the way that it analyzes stuff.
Yes, and it's doing it in real time. So that it's constantly EQing all the time as it's going, I guess, sample by sample. I've not delved into the real deep nuts and bolts of how they're doing it, but it's kind of magical. And it was one of those things that I saw at NAMM a few years back and it was like, damn, that's kind of cool. So I picked it up and I've used it on occasion because it does a really wonderful job of setting up a constant EQ that's always going on based on the parameters of what you give it, of like how bright you want it or how, high or low it needs to be, that kind of thing. So but it's not based around like a strict EQ interface that everybody would recognize, but it is a digital EQ and it works in real time as it's going through the song. Boom.
Do you use that on your 2-bus or do you use
No. Individual EQs on individual tracks. I've never tried it on the 2-bus, and I'm sure it could work there, but I'm not sure it would be the greatest place to put it. But it's something to try. I've just never done it.
Okay. Yeah, that looks interesting. I saw that. I think I listened to a demo of it one time, and I remember thinking that looks really, really interesting. What kind of sorcery is going on under the hood
That's
here?
That's the best way of putting it. What kind of magical sorcery are they using?
Yeah.
So the Gulfoss, it would make that list for me as well.
Right. Yeah. No, that escaped my mind, but that absolutely that's a good one to bring up as well.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that there used to be some Waves digital EQs like the Renaissance and just their it's not the C6, but like the E6, I guess it is, or something like that. It's just the multi-band EQ that they have. Yeah. And I kind of got away from using those, unfortunately. Yeah.
No, I think I agree with that. I had the Renaissance bundle at one point, and it wasn't that it was bad. I think it was just my workflow changed a little bit when I had other options presented to me.
Workflow change. Yep.
That's So, but I know people are still swearing by them. They're using it ingrained in that. And if you like them and you use them, hey,
like we've said before, it's just a matter of the tools that you have and how well you use them.
Yep.
Yeah.
I agree.
So now we can get into that. Why would you use one over the other? Because now we've kind of shuffled through all the digital ones at this point.
I would say first is just, again, what is your workflow like? What do you know the best? I mean, what kind of EQ would you do? The other part of that would be like, so if you're...
That sounds like a song right there. What kind of EQ would you do? What kind of EQ would you do? So, yeah.
Never do that. Don't never do that again. Well, my first thing that you asked before, what ones do I like to use? At this point, the Slate stuff is really embedded into my workflow. Mm-hmm. And so I can get the results that I want fairly quickly.
What if they change the interface on you? Would you suddenly be like, what the fuck?
I don't think so. Because, I mean, with an EQ, it's like, how much can you change that? It's like, ooh, the knob is brown now. It's like, all right. Oh,
what if they took all the knobs away and it was just numbers and it was no longer sexy?
That's a good point. That is a really, really good point, because that would affect the workflow in a way that, because you'd have to, if you've been using for it and now they changed everything, it would change the workflow because now you have to think about it. So if I have to think too much when I'm sitting down and doing it, that probably would change.
Oh no, don't think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, don't say the line. You know the line.
I know the line.
Don't think Axel. So, yeah, I think that's.
But it
the
sounds
biggest
like
part for me.
you're going more for your emulations over your digital things. So what's the reason of like using that over the digital ones?
I think it was. I just liked what they imparted. Like
okay.
I've found that, okay, well, I know where I can get my results quicker, and it just became, and one big selling point that I didn't think it would be at first, because it took me a while to get used to it, but when I first started using the Slate stuff, where everything is just in essentially one plugin window, right? It's kind of got the 500 rack type of a look,
Right.
and that was a bit of a gear change first, because I was used to opening one plugin and that's my EQ, and I open another one in the chain and that's the compressor, and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now you have everything in front of you in one window. So that has affected it as well, where it's like, okay, well, I need to adjust the compressor here a little bit, and now I'm gonna adjust the EQ or whatever happens to be. It's all in one chain. It's all in one window. So that has also gotten a little bit faster. And it took me a minute to kind of get used to that workflow, or just mentally to kind of get into that. So I think that is a big part of it as well, where I can pull in, just like you have with your UA stuff, you have presets in that 500 window. So you can, I open it up and boom, I hit a button, and that's my master bus setup that I like to use. And then I can start tweaking that. And I have the same thing for different channels, whatever I like to do. Here's my kick, or here's my snare, or guitar bus, or whatever happens to be. So it's just like, it's one or two clicks away, and you're right there, and that's a good starting point.
Yeehaw.
Yeah. So I think that was a big thing for me, but I still like, and sometimes I actually like to sort of challenge myself and say that I'm just going to use Logic stock plugins, and that turns out to be a lie most of the case, because then my drums are
on this podcast right there.
Yeah, but at least I admitted to it. So it's like, because I don't use, really the guitar amp emulations in Logic. I don't use the drummer more often than not. So there's always some third-party stuff going on in there.
Sure.
But again, that's just because I know those pieces, and I know that's what I want, and that's just faster. But when it comes to EQs and the compression and reverbs and stuff like that,
but we're only talking EQs right now. Stay on point, sir.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I got a little excited. No, I could definitely do that with just using the Logic EQ. That wouldn't be a problem. It just, I have the choice and I don't have to. But if I was forced to? Yeah, absolutely. That's not an issue.
Gotcha.
What about you?
Well, there are points where I use the emulation EQs, and then there are points where I use the digital EQs.
Yeah.
And they each have their uses. So generally speaking, I will track more often using the emulation EQs to impart, quote unquote, the vibe into the recording, along with getting a little bit of general EQing to make sure that the sound is as close as possible as it needs to be.
Yeah.
In the mix phase of doing things, I will sometimes use the emulations, and I will sometimes use the digital EQs. And that has more to do with, is there a problem that needs to be solved that happened in the tracking? Or is it something I just want to continue imparting some kind of weird juju that the emulation is supposedly putting in there? So it really becomes, in the mix phase, more sonic and program dependent upon whether I'm using the emulation or the digital EQ. But when I'm tracking, it's like 99.99%. It's very, very rare that I'm going to use a digital EQ when tracking. It's always going to be an emulation when tracking. So that's where I would kind of put that. And it's not that I'm using one over the other. It's just that the emulations are usually geared for more general sonicness. When you need surgical precision, that's where the digital EQs are really going to shine more often than not.
Yeah.
So that's
absolutely
that's
agree
where
on
I'll
that.
make that distinction between where I would use one over the other is in that case, in that kind of caseload.
Yeah.
So
No, I absolutely agree with that. Where there's, problem solving, surgical cutting, that kind of stuff, digital kind of things. If you have a signal that you just want to sweeten a little bit or a lot, then the hardware emulation can really, really shine there.
But of course.
All right.
So what's going to be our Tuesday tip for all of this kind of stuff? What are you planning?
I am planning on showing a trick that I learned from a good friend of mine. If you're listening to these emulations and you have a hard time hearing what they're actually imparting, I'm going to show a trick where you can isolate that so you can learn your gear a little bit better.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's a simple trick, but you'll have to wait till Tuesday to hear it.
You hear that? Tuesday, and that's on YouTube, by the way, on our YouTube channel.
Or go to our website.
Yes, and you can go on the website and it will be posted there as well. And then you don't have to go to YouTube and you can just watch it at the website, which is insidetherecordingstudio.com, just in case you don't know.
Yeah.
And with that kind of wrapped up the EQ portion of things. We're going to delve into our Friday finds. And we always kick it off with Chris. So, Chris, what did you find this week?
I found something that you have found in the past.
Uh-oh.
Soothe. Soothe 2.
Oh, it's like a rediscovery. Did you not mention Soothe last week?
No.
You didn't?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
What did I mention last week?
I don't recall. It kind of seems like it might have been Soothe, but I don't know.
No, I haven't mentioned Soothe. But I had a project this week where I was doing a mix, and there was it was a guitar heavy mix, so that there was this sort of shreddy guitar playing going on. And
shreddy. Yeah,
and this was one of those cases where I got the files and the audio was printed. There was no DI that I got. So that was in most of the it was fine. But it was one track where I found there was like some harshness in the tone. And normally I would, go out. I'm just going to try to find that and EQ it out. But I thought, no, you know what? I'm going to try to throw soothe on it.
Soothe it out, damn it.
Yeah, and I did. I mean, I quite literally just inserted the plugin, adjusted a couple of parameters, and that took care of it right there. So I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And that was one of the first times where I've got to use that in there. So for the guys from Oak Sound, thank you. So yeah, Soothe 2.
Yeah, if you're reading the usages of the gear that we use to create this podcast, you'd know that Soothe is being used on this podcast. So what you're hearing is also a result of using Soothe 2. Right. Soothe 2. I guess you got to make that distinction because there was a Soothe 1 and now there is Soothe 2.
Soothe 2.
Both of them are by OX Sound.
Mm-hmm. And it was fantastic. So that will have to be my pick or my find for this week.
There you
Friday.
go.
So what about you?
Soothe 2 helps save a guitar track for you. That's awesome.
And I would say the mix as well. Yeah, it was great. Yeah. Threw it on, boom, done. Yeah.
Fantastic.
What about you, Jody? What do you got for us?
Me. I am looking at additional tape functionality plugins in a sense.
Of course you are.
Yes, because, you can never have too much tape. Although I'm speaking metaphorically, of course, because I'm trying to get rid of all the tape in my life and find ways of recycling and getting rid of the old ones that I have. But I did find a new tape plugin this week by a company called Fuse Audio Labs. They have a tape plugin called Flywheel, and that emulates a reel-to-reel tape machine and gives you the control over various functionalities of it, like the IPS and the type of biasing that you're doing on the tape. And I believe it also does the tape formulations too. So you can mess around with it for a free trial for 14 days, I believe the free trial goes. And the plugin in and of itself for the time being is at $29. And I think that's an introductory offer because I think it just came out.
Nice.
So yeah, you can't beat it. You can try it and it will help when you need tape saturation of sorts.
Very cool.
I can't, I mean, there's nothing bad I can say about it. Playing around with it, it was actually quite fun to mess around with. So it was just
But yeah, I mean, I love it when they have, even for a cheap plugin like that, when they do a trial.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome, you know.
Well, there goes my $29.
Yeah, there you go. Very cool.
Right out my pocket and into my computer. So
right.
The Fuse Audio Labs Flywheel is the pick of Friday find of me, Jody.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So I think we have a new point that we want to bring up because we're at the end of this episode. So
right. So if you throw out the word flywheel, let's make it flywheel this week.
Let's make it flywheel this week.
And you email that to goldstar@insidetherecordingstudio.com. We'll send you a gold star. Because you've made it this far. Just as simple as that. Flywheel.
You made it to the end of the show, and you deserve a gold star for that. So thank you.
That's right. So, and now, while we still have you here and we've got your attention, we would like to ask you to go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com. You can sign up for our email list. You'll get weekly reminders about the tips that we're coming out on Tuesday tips, and we'll make sure that you also don't miss any future episodes as well, because we like to send you emails and keep you informed of what we've got going on. And we can also tell you about things we've done in the past that you may not be aware of, and you can go find them a lot easier. All with email. It's pretty cool how that works. Plus, if you have a topic suggestion for Chris and I to start blabbering on about, you can send that to us via email as well, and we will consider it for a future episode of Inside the Recording Studio. And with that, I'm going to say sayonara.
See you later, Jody. Let's put a bow on it.
And everybody out there and Inside the Recording Studio land, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week. And if you come to our website on Tuesdays, Tuesday Tips.